Well, a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Ian Town, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, and it's a great honour for me to introduce my friend and colleague, Gail Gillon, Professor Gail Gillon, to you this evening. This What If series, and some of you have been to many of them, unlike me, has been really quite a new face for the university's discussion fora. It's in a new venue here in the Undercroft, and it's been a little bit more edgy, I think. Some of the debates coming up will be equally edgy, and today we've got, I know, a very well-informed audience, because I know many of you out there are involved in the education sector, be it directly or as interested practitioners. So we are very fortunate tonight to, in fact, I think we're going to have two speakers, if I'm not mistaken, and Gail will introduce her colleague during the course of her lecture. So Gail will be very well known to most of you. She's on our staff, has been here, in fact, since 1997, having done her PhD at the University of Queensland in Australia in this field, and in 2007 took up what was to be a pretty major challenge of leading the new College of Education in its first few years of operation, and she's done a marvellous job. The college is now ready to fully integrate on our campus, we hope, in the next year or two, and to complete that process that was started in 2007. So as you know, Gail has done a lot of postdoctoral and research work. Unlike me and many of her colleagues, she continues to do research, continues to have students, and continues to be invited all around the world to talk about her special topics. And in fact, recently she travelled to the US, where she was made a Fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, the first New Zealander to be awarded that great honour. So could I ask you to welcome Professor Gail Gillon?
Tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you, Professor Town, for that lovely introduction, and welcome everyone tonight. It's great to have you here and great to see so many here. I understand the enrolment process has been a little bit difficult, and that's part of the test, you see. We prime you for intellectual debate, and the first intellectual test is to get enrolled. So well done to everyone who had trouble trying to enrol for the event tonight. And what an interesting title, isn't it? What if we could prevent dyslexia? And fantastic to imagine that that indeed could be the case, because I know those that will have dyslexia here in the audience, those of you who are parents of children with dyslexia or who teach children with dyslexia will understand the struggle and the immense effort that a reading disorder such as dyslexia brings. And it obviously doesn't just affect a child's academic ability, it affects their ability right across their social and their networking. And in many aspects of what they do. So the concept of trying to prevent that is such an exciting one. And indeed we have made really significant advancements in this field that we're going to talk to you about some of those tonight. And later in the presentation I'm going to ask Professor John Everatt to talk about dyslexia in other languages other than English, which is also a really fascinating field. But tonight, before I start, I would like to make a few acknowledgements. I'm part of the Language and Literacy Research Lab at the College of Education, and as you can see we have a number of colleagues and researchers as well as a growing number of doctoral students, all studying aspects of literacy and language development that feed into dyslexia. And that's one of the things we know, as I introduced, that children with dyslexia will affect different aspects of their life, and so many things contribute to that. And I remember when I first started out in my journey in this area, which was in the early 1990s, when I did my PhD in this area, and looked at interventions and the power of phonological processing intervention to help children with dyslexia. And I remember one parent coming up to me some years later, and I had been working with her son, and she said to me, "I just really want to thank you because my child's rugby has really improved." And I looked at her thinking, who is this woman? And she said, well, let me explain. Before he was confident in reading, he wouldn't do anything. And he's always been a really talented rugby player, but he would never join the rugby team because his fear and his lack of confidence in everything he did kept him very isolated. But as he grew in confidence with his reading and became accepted in the school and with his peers, and he really grew in self-confidence, he went out and joined the rugby team and apparently had a very successful rugby career. So there you go. I thought maybe there's a tip there for the All Blacks somewhere. I could be part of their coaching team. But anyway. So yes, our language and literacy team is growing very quickly here at the College of Education at the University of Canterbury, and tonight I'm drawing on some of those expertise, particularly with Dr. Karen Carson's work, who's recently finished her PhD. Some of her research will be presented tonight, and that was in collaboration with Dr. Therese Bosted, who's also here in the audience tonight, having just flown in from Europe, so she's doing very well getting over jet lag. Also here at the university we have the Language, Brain and Behaviour Institute, first for New Zealand, and our colleagues here in the Language, Brain and Behaviour Institute are also really dedicated to looking at aspects of language, brain and behaviour that all have relevance to this field of dyslexia. So just want to acknowledge the work done there as well. So what is developmental dyslexia? Just as an introduction, I'm sure many of you have battled and read around this topic, and I just want to start by saying, of course, we're going to talk tonight about developmental dyslexia. There's also acquired dyslexia. Acquired dyslexia is often associated more with adults with traumatic brain injury or stroke, where they will have had the ability to read and they've lost that due to their brain injury. And that is a different type of dyslexia that will require different types of assessments and interventions. But the one most commonly recognised in the field of education is developmental dyslexia, where children's development has been interrupted in some way, or the development of their neural activity, their brain activity, has led to this difficulty. So let's have a look at what we think dyslexia is about. Many definitions around dyslexia. One of the ones that I wanted to look at tonight was the International Dyslexia Association, which picks up some of the themes that our research group certainly have strongly supported. So the first point is that it is a language-based disorder, a language learning disability. So that while some visual aspects can be associated with dyslexia, we are looking at a language learning difficulty. Obviously, it affects particularly reading, but it can also affect aspects of writing, spelling, and spoken language difficulties can often be associated with their written language difficulties. And while we're probably not brave enough as a research community to say this absolutely causes dyslexia, we certainly are coming out strongly to say the phonological processing difficulties are strongly associated with dyslexia. And different aspects of phonological processing, so ability to phonological awareness, or ability to recognise and hear sounds and words, beginning sounds, end sounds, be able to manipulate sounds and words, phonological memory, and the ability to be able to store phonological information and retrieve that information very quickly and rapidly when it comes to the written language process. So children who are skilled readers use these phonological processing skills to link the sounds of words to the written aspect, the orthographic aspect, very, very rapidly and quickly. Children with dyslexia struggle in that ability to hear and understand that words can be broken down into individual sounds, to be able to store that information in memory, and then to rapidly retrieve it when they need to make that connection between what the letters they see on the page and the sounds that those letters are associated with. And brain imaging studies have shown some differences in the brain development of children who are later identified as dyslexic in that phonological area, as well as some visual processing areas as well. So it's not to rule out the visual processing area, but certainly showing the phonological to be very strong. So that's the working definition that our research group has based studies on, and certainly one that's very widely accepted now around the world. So the first step, if we are to prevent dyslexia, is to be able to identify which young children might be at risk. And the thought of being able to accurately predict which young children have this difficulty in phonological processing in particular, to predict whether they're going on to struggle in reading is absolutely a first key to preventing it. So that's what we're going to look at first tonight, and then we'll look at the intervention. So a computer-based phonological awareness assessment that has been developed, as I mentioned, Karen Carson, with myself and Therese both supervising this project, as a way of saying what sorts of measures could we use to reliably predict which children might be at risk for reading difficulties as a first step towards the prevention of dyslexia. And why are we focused on phonological awareness? Because we now have scientific evidence from the last 20 years, really, that this is very conclusive evidence that phonological awareness is such a powerful predictor of children's ability to decode words. And so now we know from a reading point of view, it's not just about decoding. The point of reading is to be able to comprehend. And there's no point being able to read out aloud nicely and fluently if you're actually not comprehending the text. So yes, absolutely, the end goal for reading is comprehension of text and comprehension of meaning. But in order to get to that point, obviously, you need to be able to decode words very fluently, very efficiently, so your brain can focus on the meaning of what you're reading, rather than trying to work out what on earth those letters on the page look like. So phonological awareness is not an end goal in itself. The ability to identify sounds and words, to know that dog starts with a dis sound or book ends with a k sound, we don't need to know that for any other reason than how it helps a child quickly and accurately decode words. And so what we've found over the last 20 years of scientific research is that this ability at a young age is highly predictive of reading achievement. So what sorts of assessments can we use that might pick up on this? And so this is what we looked at in our longitudinal study. We did test development of this phonological awareness assessment following quite extensive pilot testing. So we did a series of tests to look at small samples of children and how they responded, and then we did the longitudinal study, which results are just about to be released in the research world. So the first question about in looking at any test is to say, well, are these items appropriate for 5-year-olds? You know, if they're too easy, they're too hard, they're not going to give us the right sort of predictive value that we're going to need to look for. Are they valid and reliable over time? Are they measuring what they say they're measuring? Reliable in terms of if I use the test again, will I get the same sorts of results? Or is it we're going to get very variable patterns? And importantly, and the question we're looking at tonight is how well would that ability predict their reading fluency and reading comprehension a year later? And that's a really powerful tool for teachers, but it's a screening measure, so obviously it would be just one measure teachers would be using to identify children at risk. So the participants in this study, 95 children from here in Christchurch, and to participate in the study, they had to be aged between 5 and 5'2" right at the start of the study. And we had 74 children eligible who gave parental consent, obviously, to participate that had typical speech and language development, and 21 children who had spoken language difficulty. And the design of the study was to the CBA, the computer-based assessment. We administered at the start of the school year, we administered again halfway through, and we administered it at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, we also looked at their reading ability on a number of measures. And so the assessment content, what do we have in this task? Over the last at least 15 years, I've been trialling various paper-based assessments in phonological awareness, based on some of the very early work in this field by Bradley and Bryant, UK researchers, right back in the 1980s. And we adapted those tasks over time and kept getting very reliable results from a range of research studies that we did. So we based this computer test on those paper-based tests, but we wanted a format that actually didn't rely on people to have to administer it, that we've got it easily administered by even 4-year-olds. 4-year-olds have successfully used this quite easily. In fact, some parents have been quite surprised. They said, "Oh, I don't think my child can use a computer," and we just sit them in front of it and wait, "Oh, really?" Very quickly adapt nowadays most children to being able to use a computer very independently and very confidently. And how we've set the test up is that the results are all recorded, so every time the child is clicking, that is being recorded, and a spreadsheet of results will be sent to the teacher to identify each item that the child has ticked or clicked on, so they can analyse which items they had trouble with, and that just gets fed back immediately. So it reduces the time. What the pilot testing showed us was that it was much faster to do it on a computer. There was no difference in terms of quality, and that we got the same results if we did it with a very experienced researcher in assessment and paper-based versus the independent child working on the computer. Exactly the same results, but much more efficient when administered on the computer. So we have rhyme oddity tasks, picking the odd word out, so which word does not rhyme, which is more challenging than if you just ask a child to say, "Do these words rhyme?" So we're asking them to identify which word doesn't rhyme, identifying the initial sounds in words, the final sounds in words, blending sounds together or phonemes together to make words, deleting phonemes from words, and segmenting words into phonemes. And I'll show you a little clip now of what the tasks look like, and then a little video clip of a child doing the task. Each item has 10 test items and 2 practice items. So the first clip you'll see are actually the practice items, where the child will get feedback around whether it's a correct response and how to do the task.
Hello there, thanks for coming and playing. Today I have some friends who would like to meet you. Each of my friends has a special sound. They need your help to find their special sound at the start of a word. Can you help them? Great! Let's help my first friend find their special sound together. This is my friend Dog. Dog starts with the D sound. Dog likes words that start with the D sound. Let's see what words Dog will like. What word starts with the D sound? Moon, duck, whale. Duck starts with the D sound. This is Dog's favourite sound, D. What word starts with the D sound? Horse, rope, door. Door starts with the D sound. This is Dog's favourite sound, D, door. Can you hear the D sound at the start of door? Nice working. Now it's your turn to help my friends find their special sound at the start of a word.
Right, so you can see that was the introduction to the task. The number at the side, you saw the number 10. Once they start on the test items, they get 10 seconds for each item. And each item is introduced by a new character. So there's a mouse, there's a seal, there's a buzzy bee, and each item, they get two opportunities, two sets of cards to select the right one for the sound, and 10 test items altogether. So after 10 seconds is rolled through, it will move to the next item, even if they haven't clicked a particular item. So this will show you an example of, let's Go to the next one. A little video clip now of a child actually doing the task of phoneme blending. So this task, they had to blend sounds together and choose the correct word. Just takes a wee while to load this one, I think.
Saying. Let's begin. Oh my gosh, here is a cake, a cape, and a ring. I'm going to say one of these words very slowly. Click on the picture that you think I am saying.
That's easy.
Listen again. Good job. You heard cake. Let's do another one.
Okay, this will be easy.
Here is a sheet, a sheep, and a mop. I'm going to say one of these words very slowly. Click on the picture that you think I am saying. Shh. Great listening. You heard sheep.
Right, so you get the general idea, and you can see that for some children this is very easy. For some children it's pretty tough going. And the particularly challenging tasks are the phoneme segmentation tasks or deletion tasks. And so our next example will just show you some tasks that while we were setting this up this afternoon, I had some university students try, and one of them didn't quite get it right. I was a bit worried about him. I said he should come to the lecture tonight.
You're doing a great job. We are going to take away some more sounds from words. This time make sure you listen very carefully to the start of each word. This picture says slip. Say slip.
Slip.
Say slip again, but don't say the s sound at the start.
Lip.
What word do we get?
Lip.
Is it pip, book, or lip?
How can we keep on slipping?
Great listening. You heard lip. This is a price. Say price.
Price.
Say price again, but don't say the p sound at the start.
Rice.
What word do we get? Is it rice, ice, or moon? This is a story.
Right, so you can see the children enjoy interacting with it, and you can hear them answering the computer as if it's a real person, really, can't you? And enjoying that activity. So then, once we had the results from these 95 children, we looked at different measures of analysis, particularly with Trees Bosted's expertise here, to see whether the items were a fit. In other words, they were a good fit for the age group we were looking at. Whether they measured a range of difficulty, because if we want a test to be able to predict, we need to have not too easy, not too hard. We've got to get a good range. And some of the analysis we were looking for to see whether all the items for each task fitted within a good range, and also measured items that were lower in difficulty and higher in difficulty, so that over that year they had room to grow. If it was all too easy at 5, it wasn't going to show us anything. So we found on all the test items we mainly got a very good fit, and the summary of that is that we found on the rhyme oddity task a couple of items that were too easy, and this is where now we'll do a bit more work on the measure to identify which tasks we might change. And we found that the phoneme segmentation task to break words into individual sounds at the beginning of the year was quite challenging for the 5-year-olds, but therefore was a good one to use as they move through the year. So as their skill should be developing, by 6, they should be really good at phoneme segmentation, even though they're going to struggle with it at 5. So, as I mentioned, these are a few task items now we're going to go back and look at in a bit more detail. But generally we found it had very strong reliability and predictability. And if we looked at how it predicted children's performance, we looked at the 75 children that performed above the bottom quartile in terms of their performance on these tasks. And then we looked at the 20 children from that 95 who scored at the bottom quartile at school entry when they were 5. And then we looked at their end-of-year word decoding was one of the measures we looked at. And we found 75 children who performed well at 5 on these tasks were now reading at or above their age level 1 year later. We didn't get 100%, obviously. We had 4 children from that 75 who actually did quite well on the task to start with, but who weren't reading at age expected level a year later. And then the reverse for those in that bottom group. We had 4 children in the bottom group who just made it to age expected levels. They weren't doing above, but they did make it to age expected levels. But we had 16 performing below and well below expected age levels. So those were the outliers from the predictability, but overall it gave us a rating of, it was, to be precise, 91.59, I think it was, or rounded up to 92% accuracy from those children at 5 who struggled on this task or who did well on this task in terms of predicting whether they were doing well at reading or were struggling at reading. So that's given us quite a bit of confidence to say this is worth pursuing and this is worth looking at, because if we can identify with this accuracy right at the start of school, it's going to send up a flag for us as teachers to be able to say which children do we need to see, to really think about it a little more carefully and make sure they're engaging in literacy and monitoring their literacy really closely right from the start of school entry. When we repeated this test halfway through the year, when the children were now 6 months into school, the accuracy went up. It was 94% accuracy. So as children gained a bit more literacy experience, if they were still struggling in phonological awareness after that initial exposure to reading, it was much more likely to say, actually, this is a child at risk, and they would, at 1 year post-school entry, were doing really quite poorly in their literacy achievement. So a great simple tool that we think teachers will enjoy using. Our intent now, as I said, is to look at a few of those test items a little more and then make this freely available on the website for people to be able to download and trial with groups of children in their school. And we're working out a system that will also be able to provide us with a larger data set and a data source so we can have much bigger numbers to really look at the effectiveness of the tool. And that's just looking at, for those of you who like statistics, looking at the reliability. 0.7 is a good indicator of reliability. So again, you can see the rhyme oddity and the initial phoneme identity tasks right at school entry. The easiest tasks were very reliable at 5. But as the year moved through, the harder tasks come into play, so that by the end of the year, these tasks were very reliable and good indicators of reading ability. So just to conclude that first part of the presentation, we saw that the majority of these test items were appropriate at some point during the school year for this population of 5-year-olds. We could accurately predict reading ability via word decoding ability for 92% of the children that we investigated. There was a high degree of reliability and validity with the assessment measure. It was time efficient, it was faster to administer. There was no resource involved. We didn't have to have a teacher administering it. Very easy for the children to do by themselves, or certainly with a teacher aide or a parent helper, just getting them onto the computer. So very efficient in terms of resourcing. And the next steps, as I mentioned, to look at now a bit more detail around the test, getting larger sample sizes, getting larger databases, and what John will talk to you about in a moment is looking at different languages for this test. So if we can predict which children are at risk, it comes to the next point, can we do anything about that? What can we do if we're saying, and I'm sure parents here are saying, well, it's one thing to tell me my child might be at risk, what are you going to do about that? And that's a really important question to be asking. How can we help ensure that all children are going to become successful readers and writers? So the next part of this study was to look exactly at that question and think about, when we look at intervention, we need to think about a tiered model for children, particularly for children at risk of dyslexia, because we know that one simple intervention is not going to make dyslexia go away. It is going to need to be a structured, intensive type of ongoing intervention to really resolve the very persistent difficulties that a child with dyslexia will present with. And so we need to think about the first level of intervention, obviously, is at the class level. What can we be doing in the classrooms that is going to make a difference for these children at high risk? We're looking at the teaching being more explicit and direct in terms of phonological awareness, and really ensuring that phonological awareness is focused on making the link for the child between the speech and the print, or the sound and the letter. Then children will need more work than just at the class level. Those that will benefit at a class level, we've seen time and time again that children with mild delay in their reading or just need more language exposure will respond very quickly to classroom level intervention. And they will be the ones that come into school, they get exposed to a rich language environment that we offer here in our New Zealand curriculum, and they will certainly take off with their reading. Children with identified or more persistent underlying language difficulties will need more than the regular classroom instruction. They will need small group intervention. And this is where we believe that intervention should focus very explicitly on teaching children how to quickly process phonological information at the phoneme level, not just at the rhyme level. What we've seen in England is a number of phonological awareness tasks and interventions take off, but a lot of focus just on rhyming games, rhyming words, but that is not going to solve this problem. It has to be at the phoneme level or the individual sound level, phoneme segmentation, phoneme blending, phoneme identity, phoneme detection, to get change in reading outcomes. And then for children that are at risk for dyslexia, they will also most likely need individual work. So we can't expect teachers to solve all the problems at the class level. Small group work will be the next tier that we'll look at. And then for the very small percentage of children that have these really persistent difficulties, they will need the individual work, and it must have a strong focus at the phonological level. And particularly as the children get older, older children with dyslexia respond very positively to rapid phonological processing type of activities that link the speech and the print, the orthographic with the phonological. So just briefly, I'll go through some of the results from the intervention and show you what we did here. So we had the 95 children that we had identified, and we had divided children. In this case, we had the 95 children in the assessment were the children in Group C. We had additional groups of children. Group A and B were randomly assigned, and these were children that participated in the experimental interventions, and Group C became the control group. And you can see we had a mix of schools here in Christchurch from middle, high and low socioeconomic backgrounds. All the children were aged between 5 and 5'2" at the start of the study. So our design was one of multiple drop-in of intervention for the two experimental groups. So the first term of their school year, they all just got their usual literacy program, which in New Zealand is a language-rich language program, often had some phonics incorporated into that, like Jolly Phonics or some other phonic-based program, but not explicit phonological awareness. So in term 2, Group A received phonological awareness in addition to their regular program. In term 3, you can see it rolled into Group B, and then Group C received their regular program across the year, which gave us an opportunity to see the different treatment effects. And we assessed at these 3 points in time to look at outcomes. We used the phonological awareness assessment amongst other assessment tasks. We looked at spelling and reading as well. And the phonological awareness was, over the 10 weeks, it was administered mostly by the class teacher who was trained with the speech-language therapist involved. There were 4 30-minute sessions in the class for a total of 10 hours. And we were teaching at the class level activities, simple game activities. This isn't, these are very simple games. It's just about bringing the child's attention to individual sounds and words and making that very explicit. So, and we involved the professional development for the teachers involved as well. So content like, this is based on my earlier work, the Gillon Phonological Awareness Program, that is available free. I'll give you the website for that at the end. So the program that this is based on is available for you to look at. We did a bit of rhyming work, but mainly focused on identifying initial and final sounds and words, blending sounds to form words, segmenting words, etc. So lots of awareness of sounds and words. And as I mentioned, that's the website, so it's just off our College of Education homepage, and clicking on my webpage, you'll see phonological awareness resources at the end of that site that you can download and have a look at those activities if you wish to. So let's just watch a simple clip. You'll notice the emphasis on recording sounds as they're trying to write and spell. So listening for each individual sound in a word and making those connections really clear for the child was an important part of the intervention. And here's a simple clip of something that entertained our students here quite nicely this afternoon around a theme song that'll be well known to any Year 1 teacher.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he had a lamb.
Say it with me. Good job. All right, Petra, start for us.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he had a...
Julia's going to say it for us this time. Good job. Say it with Julia. Well done. Take it away, Petra.
Right, so as you can see, very simple types of activities at a class level to engage children in focusing on sounds and words, but produced really quite dramatic results. The A group are the children that received the phonological awareness first. So you can see in terms of their word reading ability, at the middle of the year, you can see that blue line shooting up. Then the red line were the group that received the phonological awareness second, and you can see by the end of the year they had reached the children who received it first, and were both significantly ahead, statistically significantly ahead of Group C, who received their usual classroom program. So this simple burst of phonological awareness integrated into the class program accelerated the reading development for this group of children. If we looked at that in terms of their reading ability with children with speech and language impairment, we saw children with speech and language impairment who received their usual program were below where we expected them to be 1 year later, but the children who received speech and language, the children with speech and language impairment who received the phonological awareness met the same level as their peers with typical development at the end of the year. So those with speech and language impairment who received usual classroom literacy were behind in their reading a year later. Those that received with speech and language impairment who received the phonological awareness matched that of their typically developing peers a year later. But the really interesting point is the last result. Those with typical development who received the phonological awareness actually were accelerated compared to their peers by about 11 months in their early reading age. So it had the effect of really accelerating reading development for typical children and catching up those with speech and language impairment to their typical peers who had just had their regular program. And the same was with reading fluency on the Neil analysis of reading ability revised. The same effect was true for their reading comprehension. So their ability to understand what they were reading was also accelerated. In other words, as they become very quick and efficient at decoding words, they could put more energy into understanding the meaning of text. The other interesting fact was the percentage of children at risk. So we can see in blue are the children who received the Phonological Awareness Program, and at the end of the year, only 5% of that cohort were at continued risk in terms of their reading ability, compared actually to a pretty high number, 25% of children who were receiving their typical class program, and the same was true for their reading comprehension. And they're the sorts of numbers, about 20% of children at risk, that we hear about in terms of children failing in our reading system currently and children requiring reading recovery. And what this is suggesting, actually, we can really reduce the number of children that might require additional intervention if we have very focused classroom instruction right from the start of school entry that's going to build those early phonological awareness skills as well as their other literacy skills. So it's not about doing phonological awareness in isolation. We have to remember that phonological awareness was done on top of their additional literacy program. So they're still getting the benefit of a rich language program at school, but in addition, we're receiving phonological awareness and significantly reduced the number of children a year later that may have needed additional work. So a huge implication for teachers' time. They're going to have less children that they need to focus on, and a huge impact really on resourcing, because it means we will have less children that we will need to find additional resources for. We can focus on those most in need, in other words, to really put our limited resources that we have into. So the conclusions from this study was that classroom phonological awareness is beneficial for literacy development, and this is intervention administered by their regular class teacher. It will reduce the percentage of at-risk students. Short intensive bursts can have a significant impact that can be maintained for reading and for spelling, and that children with spoken language difficulties can indeed benefit from this type of instruction. So really quite exciting results, and we'll open up at the end in about another 10 or so minutes for discussion. But right now I'd like to shift our focus, because up until now we've been talking about children in Christchurch who have English as their first language. It makes it way more complicated if you have dyslexia or a reading difficulty and English is not your first language. And we're very fortunate here at the University of Canterbury to have one of the world's experts in dyslexia in other language, and that is Professor John Everatt. So I'd like you to welcome Professor John Everatt to talk to us a little bit about thinking now in terms of intervention for children with dyslexia when English isn't their first language. So welcome, John. I'll pass over to you.
Thank you. Let me just move this up a little bit. There's very few people that I have to move the microphone up after speaking. So thank you, Gail. Okay, my part in the talk is to look at some of the issues that Gail has been talking about and how they might relate to children who have moved country, if you like. They've moved from one part of the world into another part of the world, and English is then a language they're having to develop after that period of movement. So these are children who were coming from maybe a different language background and now having to start to learn English as a second language. That's the main focus of the work that we've been doing, and that's primarily has been work that has been done in the UK But we've also been looking at children who may stay in their own country context, but will be learning English as an additional language, as maybe a foreign language, but English is maybe an important language to learn because of the context within which the work has been, their educational system is looking at. So it's an important language for them to learn. So there's those two contexts that we're looking at. The main area for that second context that I'm going to talk about today is Arabia, and I just need to mention a couple of other people involved in the work. In the UK, I've been working with colleagues at Bath Spa University, primarily led by somebody called Dr. Tilly Mortimer, and she works very closely with the British Dyslexia Association. So that's the group that have been doing a lot of the work there. And then in Arabia, I've been working mainly with somebody who's at the Australian College of Kuwait, and Dr. Gad El-Bahari and his team have been helping me with the Arabic side of this work, and he works closely with a Centre for Child Evaluation and Learning, I think it is. No, Child Evaluation and Teaching, sorry. And they, again, work very closely with children coming from a background of having dyslexia. So both the British Dyslexia Association and the Child Evaluation, Centre for Child Evaluation and Teaching focus on children with dyslexia. So what I want to talk about, therefore, is focusing on the children, these children who are primarily having problems with learning literacy, but they're coming from a background where they've learnt one language as their first language, and now English is a language that they're having to learn as a second language, either within their own country in Arabia or following moving to the UK. These children primarily were identified, or initially were identified by their teachers as struggling with literacy learning, primarily looking at their reading ability, but we've also used some standardised measures of reading ability, primarily looking at English reading ability, but within the Arabic context, we've also been developing measures in Arabic, and we've also able, therefore, to look at their first language levels as well, which sometimes can be quite useful when you're trying to identify the underlying causes of dyslexia. This is one of the problems that we have working in this field. When you're dealing with a group who have English as a second language, there's all sorts of language issues on top of the dyslexia that you need to consider. So we've been looking at how we might be able to use first language measures to also help in the identification process of dyslexia. So all of the children I'm going to talk about now are children who have shown some evidence of struggling a little bit with reading, and then we've looked at them from some background measures of other areas of skills, and one of the reasons why I'm here in New Zealand is because Gail gives away her tests for free, and that makes it very easy to steal them. So we've been using some of Gail's measures to help us to identify children, and then translating them into Arabic, of course. So that's a little bit of the background. The main focus of the work that we've been doing then is, once we've identified children who may be struggling in some way or other, then we've been starting to look at how we might support these children with their literacy development. These children, remember, we're looking primarily at their English ability, and therefore these are children who may not be progressing in English language as well as same age or similar aged individuals who have English as their first language. So one of the things that we wanted to do was look at whether phonological awareness training can support English development, in English literacy development in these children. But one of the things we realised very early on in this work, and this work has been over quite a period of time, is that one of the other things that the children needed was to embed that phonological awareness training not only within literacy but also within language. So one of the things that we found was that we could train up the phonological awareness that may allow them to decode words, but sometimes they still didn't know what the words meant. because the words were still things that they were learning as part of their growth in English. So the slight modifications of the types of interventions that Gail was talking about have involved us starting to look at how we can support vocabulary learning at the same time. These are older children than Gail's been talking about. These are 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds. So these are children who will have experienced some, maybe a couple of years of English schooling, English language schooling. But we're looking to see whether within these children the focus on phonological awareness linked to literacy, but also linked to meaning within words by supporting their vocabulary, can then show the similar sorts of gains that we'd find within an English first language group. So that's our first group within the data I'm going to show you in a moment. These are children who are going through some primarily sound-based training, focusing on phonemes, focusing on being able to recognise phonemes within words, giving them practice at taking phonemes out of words, putting phonemes in words, manipulating phonemes within words, but then also telling them things about the meaning of those words to try and build up vocabulary as well. We compared these children against two other groups of children, a control group who actually weren't as bad as the other two groups. These were children whose English language experience wasn't too bad, so we were focusing the training on the support on children who were very much at the bottom end of the English literacy measures that we had. So we had a control group who weren't too bad, but they wouldn't hurt from a little bit of extra support that we gave later on. But you'll see in a minute that they were a little bit better at the start than the other two groups. That was deliberate. We wanted to target those who needed extra support. And then we had another group who experienced an extra intervention. They experienced our trained teachers going in and supporting, but the focus was purely on sitting and reading together. So there wasn't the phonics-based training or the specific vocabulary-based training that the primary group of children that we were looking at received. So the same sort of things that Gail was talking about. This is just my slight version of how to present these sorts of results. No statistics from me, I'm afraid. I just like nice, colourful graphs. That's what I go for. So the control. This is a measure of the children's ability to read individual words, and the black line is that control group. And the pre-dots are the measure of their word reading ability before the intervention. The post-dots are the ones where we're looking at their reading ability after the intervention. So the control group show a bit of a flat line there. So these are children who didn't receive any extra tuition over and above their normal learning. This was over about an 8 to 10 week period over a term of support. The red group, the target group that we were looking at, as I said, were below and statistically below the control group to start off with. But over the period of the training of focusing on phonology with vocabulary learning as well, these children gained and caught up with the control group. So they were now starting to perform at levels after 8 weeks of support. They were now starting to perform in word reading at the level of the control group. The paired reading group also showed improvement, which is good. That means that paired reading is working, but not so much. The level of improvement with these children was not as great as the primary group that we're interested in, but they were showing some level of improvement. We then went on to follow up with these children some time later. All of the teachers involved, we gave some training to, particularly in the paired reading sorts of things, to get them to try to support these children a little bit more. And we told them a little bit, we started at this point and have been continuing to train them on these sorts of interventions. So we were starting to see improvements in all groups over the follow-up period in word reading. So that's the reason why all of these follow-up conditions are the same colour now. They're now starting to experience the same sort of things. But we're still showing improvements in follow-up, even though there wasn't a specific period of intensive support for these children. For any of the groups, it's now just a normal teacher, but a teacher who's now trained a little bit in the sorts of things that we want them to do with these kids. So all groups now are showing improvements in word reading. We also looked at something called, I'm going to call non-word reading. This was the ability to make a good guess at a word that we know they've never seen before, because we made the words up. These were not English words, they have no meaning, so the child now has to try to say what a word is, try to pronounce a word without any meaning. So this was again a measure that we used before the intervention and after the intervention, and the children who were specifically trained in these phonics-based interventions showed the ability to be able to translate individual letters into sounds and make good guesses at non-words, these made-up words, as to what they should pronounce, how they should be pronounced. So this is I think this is good evidence that this intervention is specifically targeting these children's ability to translate letters into sounds. One of the factors, one of the things that we think dyslexic children have particular problems with. So again, the phonological intervention here specifically target their ability to use phonology within literacy. And again, we found, following the interventions, that there was continued improvements. The improvements here, once we'd taken the specific phonological intervention out, were not as good as for word reading, but there was evidence, there's still evidence as we're following on, that they have gained at least some skills. I think it would have been good if we went back and we are doing, at least in Arabia, going back and training the teachers even more to use these skills, but there is at least some evidence that there's follow-up within these sorts of conditions. These ability to read individual words, just as with Gail's data, shows similar knock-on effects in terms of reading comprehension. So again, we looked at the ability of the children to comprehend passages before the intervention and following the intervention, and the group that showed the most gains, again, with the phonological plus vocabulary group, though the paired reading group also showed good gains here. There's a little bit of a difference in gains in the phonological and vocabulary group, but they're not too bad with the within the paired reading group. Both groups started to catch up with the control group. So again, the support in terms of individual word reading is having a knock-on effect in terms of text reading. And the follow-on from that is that our phonological and vocabulary group actually showed good improvements at follow-up, whereas for some reason the paired reading group showed a little bit of a reduction there. We think that's because we've trained the phonological group in skills that can give them a little bit of independence, whereas the paired reading group maybe didn't have that level of independence training. So again, we need to look at how we can support individual teachers in using this with all of the children, and again, that's something that we're doing next. Finally, because we were also targeting vocabulary, we wanted to see whether the interventions that we were using were supporting their language skills as well as their reading skills. And again, there was some evidence that both with the phonological and vocabulary group, but also somewhat with the paired reading group, that there was improvements in these children's level of vocabulary. And they were starting to get up to what we would expect to be typical levels for these children and this age range. And again, in follow-up, oh, sorry, that was the wrong button. Again, in follow-up, there was some evidence of a little bit of improvement, though notice that, again, this is an area where we need to look at whether we can support individual teachers in following on from these improvements, because the gains that were happening during the intervention were levelling off at post-intervention. So I think what we've got here is good evidence that the sorts of things that Gail was talking about in terms of children within New Zealand, within a New Zealand school context, who are from an English language background, and they show gains, they show improvements in their literacy following these phonological-based interventions, particularly ones that focus on the phoneme, particularly ones that relate those phonemes to letters, to the written symbols within the language, that shows similar sorts of gains within children from an English as a second language background, or who may be from a background where their English language experience may not be as good. Overall, therefore, I think the evidence of the gains during the intervention and some of the evidence for longer-term gains that they follow on from these initial gains, I think is starting to give us confidence that we can support dyslexics who are coming from an English as a second language background as well. And sometimes, if we can target the intervention appropriately, we may even find that we can improve these skills better than some individuals within an English as a first language background who may be struggling with literacy skills. Most of these children seem to be showing reasonable levels of improvements following the intervention. Those sorts of data and the other data that we've been collecting, looking at how we might distinguish children who are struggling in literacy learning and how those children show very similar sorts of phonological awareness deficits that we find in first language English groups, that sort of study where we're finding exactly the same sorts of profiles coming out with these children, I think suggests that at least for the data that we've got and the context within which we've been looking at children's development in literacy, the same underlying problems occur for children who are learning English as a second language as occur for children who are learning English as a first language. So I think these data, these sorts of findings, and the other findings within the work that we've been doing around the world argue for the same sorts of underlying difficulties. The reason why I think that's important is that if they are the same sorts of difficulties, then we can use the same sorts of intervention programs, same sorts of support programs, maybe with a few modifications because their language background might be a little bit weaker than when English is your first language. That sort of evidence, I think, argues that we should be able to use these support procedures in all sorts of language contexts. So one of the things that I'm hoping that we can do, now that I feel as though I've almost settled into living in New Zealand now, I've only been here 4 years, still feels as though that's a relatively short time. One of the things I'd hope that we can do is start doing these sorts of things in New Zealand as well, looking at contexts within which English may not be the home language of a child, or English may be a language that they're learning as an additional language having moved to New Zealand. Or looking at contexts in which English is one of the languages learned.